The guards told me I had a visitor. They always said it with a mocking smile, as if they knew who was expecting me. It was Pastor Thomas. He came every Tuesday, not to offer grace, but to measure my suffering. He was the husband of the woman I was convicted of killing, and he came seeking a justice the court could not give him. He came for vengeance, to watch the person who destroyed his world decay behind concrete and steel. He needed to see the guilt in my eyes, but he never found it. My name is Sarah Jane, and I was their housekeeper. I was the one who found her. I was the one who called the police, and I was the one whose fingerprints were on the wrong thing at the wrong time. The media painted me as the jealous servant, the sinner who coveted her employers' lives. It was easy to believe. The pastor, a man of God, righteous in his grief, fueled their certainty. He told the jury I was a wolf, and they saw prey where there was only fear. Now, the sound of the heavy bolt sliding is my alarm clock. The sterile smell of disinfectant is my air. Prison is a cold, gray place, but it's not the worst place to be. The worst place is sitting across from that man, separated by the acrylic, seeing the reflection of his hatred. He searches my face for the confession he desires, the crack in the facade. He brings his Bible, but never reads it. It's a prop, a shield of righteousness he holds, while his eyes condemn me again. "Have you repented, Sarah Jane?" he asks, his voice soft, but the question is a stone. He wants me to admit to a sin that isn't mine. He thinks my silence is arrogance. He thinks my tears are manipulation. The other inmates whisper. They see a holy man visiting a sinner. They don't see the torment. They don't see the man who is more imprisoned by his own vengeance than I am by these walls. He is my jailer, more than the guards, more than the judge. But something is changing. I see it in the way his fingers grip the book. This week, he looked away. For 2 years, he stared at me, unwavering. Today, he looked down. He's looking for a monster, but he's beginning to see a mirror. He came to see me break, but the truth is a slow, patient light. And that light is beginning to expose the one thing he was never prepared for: my innocence. And in discovering that, he's being forced to confront his own guilt. Welcome back to our space for reflection. It is here that we hear the voices that have been silenced, the stories buried under judgment and steel. We are not here to look at the crime. We are here to look at the soul. We believe that every story contains a lesson about faith, betrayal, and the long road to redemption. Today, we bring you a story that challenges the very nature of justice and tests the limits of forgiveness, showing how truth can be its own kind of miracle. The story you are about to hear is difficult. It lives in that gray area between righteousness and revenge, where good intentions become a prison of their own. It asks a profound question. What happens when the person who comes to condemn you is the only one who can set you free? And what happens when the righteous man discovers revenge in his own heart? This is a journey into the heart of a woman who lost her freedom, but never her truth. We share these stories because, as many of you have shared in the comments, we have all felt trapped at some point. We have all felt misunderstood or judged. These narratives are not just about prison. They are about the cages we build for ourselves and those built for us. Your presence here, your empathy, and your willingness to listen, that's what makes this community a sanctuary for these confessions. If you believe in the power of these stories and want to support this space where real-life journeys are honored with dignity, please help our channel grow. Take a moment to subscribe and press the button "Enjoy" in this video. It's a small click, but it sends a powerful message that these voices matter and that redemption is a story worth telling. This ensures that this light continues to reach those who may be sitting in their own darkness. We are a global family, connected by these shared human experiences. Your support reminds us that we are never truly alone. Please let us know where you are joining us from tonight. Comment below with your city and country seeing. How far the light of these stories reaches is a profound inspiration for us all. Now, let's begin the story of Sarah Jane and the pastor who came for revenge. Silence had always been the primary language of that house. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy silence, laden with unspoken words and old resentments that seeped into the plaster. I moved through it like a shadow, a necessity. My name is Sarah Jane, and for 3 years, the scent of lemon wax on the mahogany furniture and the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway were the soundtrack of my life. I was the housekeeper, the cook, and, in recent months, Eliza Thomas's only confidant. Pastor Thomas's house was a sanctuary for the neighborhood, a public beacon of moral rectitude and divine grace. But inside, the walls were cold, and the air was thin. The pastor was a man carved from oak, strong, deeply admired by the congregation, but at home he was inflexible, distant, and consumed by his own righteousness. He spoke to God from the pulpit with a passion that made the stained glass windows tremble, but rarely spoke to his wife at the dinner table. Eliza, she was different. She was like a bird with a broken wing, trapped in a gilded cage, fragile, pale, with large eyes that seemed to hold an ancient fear or a deep sadness. She trusted me, perhaps because I was the only person there who didn't demand anything from her, who didn't see her as the pastor's wife. She told me about her crushing loneliness, about the pressure of being the model of perfection that the congregation demanded. She spoke of the emptiness that her husband's public fervor left at home, the silence he used as a weapon. I listened. I brought her chamomile tea late at night, when I heard her crying softly in her room. I was the only person who saw the fine cracks in the perfect porcelain, the only one who knew she was writing everything in a blue leather diary hidden under a loose board in her closet. That day, the rain beat against the stained glass windows of the living room, distorting the afternoon light into sickly, dancing patterns on the wooden floor. The house was too quiet. It was a different kind of quiet. Not the usual heavy quiet, but a hollow, empty quiet. Eliza should have been practicing piano. She always played on Tuesdays, melancholy Chopin pieces that seemed to fill the house with their sadness. The silence of the piano was what worried me. I called her name as I climbed the grand staircase, my voice sounding strangely loud. "Mrs. Thomas?" Only the echo of my own voice answered. In the upstairs hallway, a strong, caustic chemical smell hit my nose. Bleach. And it was coming from his office. The door, usually locked, was ajar, and that's where I found her. She was slumped near the desk, her eyes open to a ceiling she could no longer see. Her silk robe stained a terrible red that contrasted with the Persian rug. The world stopped. The sound of the rain faded. The ticking of the clock stopped. Beside her was the heavy marble bookend he kept on his desk, also stained. My first instinct wasn't to scream. It was to call. I rushed to the phone on her desk, my fingers trembling so much I could barely dial. "You have someone dead," I whispered to the operator. The pastor's wife. I didn't know at that moment that by touching that phone, I was plunging my hands into my own damnation. When the police arrived, they found me sitting on the hallway floor, unable to move, trembling. And then he arrived. Pastor Thomas. I saw him walk through the front door, his wet umbrella dripping onto the polished floor I had waxed that morning. His eyes swept across the room, landed on me with a momentary confusion, and then rose to the office. The cry he let out wasn't one of sadness. It was a roar of rage. A detective approached me, gently at first. "Miss, did you touch anything?" And I, in my shock, shook my head and pointed to the phone on the desk. That's when Pastor Thomas's gaze locked on me. The grief on his face crystallized into something hard, cold, and terrible. Certainty. In that instant, he didn't see the woman comforting his wife. He saw the jealous maid, the story the media would later devour. In that moment, standing before his wife's body, he didn't see a witness. He judged me. He sentenced me right there. The truth became irrelevant. What mattered was the narrative that seemed right, the one that placed the blame on someone outside his perfect world. And as the police officers stood me up, my hands now being examined under a forensic light, I realized the terrible truth. The blue leather diary. It was still there, and I knew, with icy clarity, what was written in it. The real judgment wouldn't be in the courtroom. It would be in the eyes of that pastor. The courtroom smelled of dust, old varnish, and the faint sweat of fear. My fear. I sat behind the defense table, dressed in a borrowed suit that looked like a costume, feeling frighteningly small under the high ceiling and the state seal etched into the dark wood above the judge. The air was heavy with the low hum of fluorescent lights and the constant sound of paper being shuffled. But the loudest sound, to me, was the silence of Pastor Thomas. He was there every day, in the front row, directly in my line of sight. He had become a monument to righteous grief, his dark suit always immaculate, his face a mask of pious sorrow for the jury and the cameras outside. But when his eyes met mine, there was no pain. There was only a steely coldness, a conviction so profound it felt like a physical force, pushing me down. He was God's man, and I was the housekeeper who, according to the prosecutor, coveted the life she couldn't have. The narrative was simple, dirty, and terribly effective. My defense attorney, an overworked, court-appointed man with eyes that carried the defeat of 1,000 lost cases, tried. But the prosecutor was a showman. He strutted before the jury, his voice rising and falling with theatrical indignation. He presented the murder weapon, the heavy marble bookend. And then he presented my fingerprints on it. I told my lawyer I didn't remember touching it, but in the chaos of that moment, in the horror of finding her, maybe I did. Maybe I leaned on it. Maybe I touched it when I picked up the phone. The prosecutor scoffed at that. A touch of shock, he asked the jury, or a touch of anger? He painted a picture of jealousy, of a resentful employee who saw Eliza as weak, who wanted the pastor, the money, the house. And Pastor Thomas, when called to testify, reinforced that. He spoke of how I was quiet and observant, words he turned into synonyms for calculating and scheming. He looked at me with a performative sadness and said, "I trusted her. My wife trusted her." But my hope rested on one thing, the blue leather diary. I told my lawyer in our hurried meetings in that musty-smelling living room about the diary hidden under the loose floorboard in the closet. I told him that Eliza wrote everything down, that she was afraid of her husband's temper, that she felt like a prisoner in her own home. "This will prove," I whispered to him, "that I had no motive." But he did. My lawyer seemed uncomfortable but promised to investigate. And then, on the penultimate day of the trial, the prosecutor smiled and announced that he was presenting the victim's diary as evidence. My heart leaped. Finally, the truth. But what he read aloud made the blood in my veins freeze. S.J. is becoming possessive. Her eyes follow me. She asks me about my husband's finances. She wants what I have. Sometimes the way she looks at me, I feel afraid. Every word was a lie, a skillful distortion of the truth. He had found it. Pastor Thomas had found the real diary first. The smell of bleach I noticed that day, he wasn't cleaning up the blood. He was wiping my fingerprints off the real diary, or perhaps destroying it while planting this poison. I screamed, "That's not true. That's a lie." But my scream only seemed to confirm the prosecutor's narrative about an unstable woman. I looked at the pastor. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't staring at me. He was looking at the judge, his face a picture of solemn suffering, as if hearing his wife's words read aloud was a new agony. But I saw it. I saw the slight tremor in his hand as it rested on his knee. He wasn't just a witness. He was the architect of my destruction. He had not only allowed his wife to be killed, I was now convinced he was responsible, but had also used her memory, her private words, to fabricate guilt in me. He was burying me alive under the weight of his own holiness. The mini-narrative twist wasn't the judge's gavel. It was the chilling realization that justice wasn't blind. It was being actively deceived by a man who knew God but preferred the devil. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty. Life imprisonment, no possibility of parole. The judge's words didn't sound like a sentence. They sounded like an echo from a distant world. I was enveloped in a thick, cold fog of disbelief. My vision narrowed until all I could see was the back of Pastor Thomas's neck. He sat motionless, like a statue of righteousness. When the gavel struck, the sound cracked in the silent air like a bone breaking. Only then did he turn, slowly. Our eyes met across the courtroom. I expected to see triumph, satisfied hatred, or perhaps even a spark of doubt. But I saw nothing. His eyes were empty, finished. He had gotten what he wanted, not justice, but closure, a sacrifice. And then he stood and left, his duty fulfilled, leaving me to be swallowed by the system he had so skillfully rigged against me. The guards lifted me by the arm, my skin tingling where their fingers gripped me. The real world vanished the moment the cold metal shackles closed on my wrists. The sound wasn't loud, just a decisive metallic click. The sound of a life ending. The transport was a blur of rattling metal, and the smell of old sweat and exhaustion filled the air. We were taken to the Bedford Hills Women's Correctional Institution. The name sounded almost bucolic, like a boarding school. The reality was a series of steel gates that slammed shut behind us with a thunderous bang that made the ground vibrate. The admission process was a lesson in dehumanization. "Take everything off," a guard said in a bored voice, as if she were asking me to take off my shoes at an airport. The air was cold on my bare skin, and the smell was overwhelming, a caustic mixture of disinfectant, industrial soap, and the faint, lingering odor of fear. They borrowed my suit, the last vestige of the woman I was, and handed me a faded green uniform, rough and reeking of bleach. It carried the anonymous scent of 1,000 bodies before mine. Each step of the process was designed to break me down, to reduce me from Sarah Jane to a number. The dry cough of the woman next to me, the echoes of screams in some distant corridor, the jargon shouted by the guards, everything seemed designed to overwhelm and intimidate. And then the cell. My home. It was a 2-by-3-meter concrete block with a metal bunk bed and a stainless steel sink and toilet combination. It had a strong smell of cold iron and peeling paint. My cellmate, a thin woman with eyes that seemed to have seen everything, just watched me as I entered, then turned to the wall, offering me silence as her only courtesy. The guard yelled, "Lights out in 5!" The solid metal door slammed shut, and the sound of the bolt sliding into place was the final punctuation. The darkness that followed wasn't total. A cold, white security light from the hallway filtered through the cracks, casting long shadows that looked like bars within bars. I lay down on the bottom bunk, the mattress as thin as cardboard. The silence of the night wasn't silent. It was filled with muffled cries, whispers, the creaking of metal, and the distant sound of boots on concrete. That's when the mini turning point happened. I expected to be afraid of the other women, of the violence, of the brutality I knew was coming. But lying there, in that oppressive cold, I realized I wasn't afraid of them. I was afraid of Pastor Thomas's face. The real prison wasn't these walls. It was the image of his empty eyes, the memory of his perfect lie. The physical cell was merely an echo of the moral cell he had placed me in. My fear wasn't of dying here. My fear was of becoming the nothingness he saw in me. The battle for my freedom was lost, but the battle for my soul was only beginning. Time in prison doesn't pass. It repeats itself. It's an endless loop marked by harsh sounds. The first is the shrill bell at 5 a.m., in a sound that cuts through sleep like a fire alarm, immediately followed by the metallic clang of cell doors being unlocked remotely. Then, the sound of guards' boots on the concrete corridor, echoing as they shout, "Count! Stand up!" You learn to stand up quickly, hands in sight, even if your soul is still lying on the floor. The morning air is always cold and carries the smell of burnt coffee and stale bread. Routine is the true sentence. It's a machine designed to grind your individuality until all that remains is obedience. Breakfast, work in the laundry, where the hot steam and the smell of bleach feel like a form of purgatory. Lunch, more work, counting, dinner, counting again, and then the final clang of the cell door. I learned to breathe iron, to feel the metallic taste of air conditioning dust on my tongue, and accept it as the only flavor that life now offered. The cafeteria was the real battleground. It was where the prison's invisible hierarchy became visible and brutal. In my first few days, I made the mistake of grabbing my tray and looking for an empty table. A large woman, whom everyone called Mama J, blocked my path. She didn't say anything, just stared at me. Her eyes were cold and assessing. A younger woman beside her hissed, "That table isn't for you, newbie. Get out." I learned quickly, you don't sit where you want, you sit where you're allowed. You don't look anyone in the eye for too long, but you also don't look away too quickly, because that's seen as weakness. I discovered the prison's families, groups of women united by race, crime, or simply the need for survival. They shared cafeteria items, protected each other in common areas, and applied their own form of justice in the showers. I didn't belong anywhere. I was a ghost, the pastor's killer, a label that made me both an outcast and a morbid curiosity. My only goal was to become invisible, to keep my head down, and to blend into the concrete. I was beginning to understand this sick ecosystem. I was learning the language, what it meant to be in the hole, who was truly serving time, and who was merely surviving. I focused on scrubbing sheets in the laundry room, letting the scalding steam clear my mind. The smell of soap was the only clean thing in my world. Then, after 6 months of this numbing rhythm, a guard called my name mid-shift. "Thompson, visit." My heart stopped. Visit? I had no one. My parents had died years before. I had no siblings. My court-appointed lawyer had disappeared after the verdict. I was ushered into the visiting room, my green uniform clinging to my sweaty back. I sat on the cold metal stool, staring at the thick glass and the black phone on the wall, and then he came in. Pastor Thomas. The air left my lungs. He didn't look like a man in mourning. He looked like a man on a mission. He sat across the room, his presence filling the small cubicle. He picked up the phone. I watched him, paralyzed. He didn't come by chance. This wasn't an act of mercy. In that moment, the mini-twist hit me with the force of a punch. The judge's sentence wasn't enough for him. He was here to begin his own. The electric hum of the intercom seemed 1,000 times louder in the deathly stillness between us. I picked up the black handset. It was cold and heavy, and smelled of disinfectant and the rancid breath of others. My hand trembled so much I almost dropped it. On the other side of the thick, scratched glass, Pastor Thomas did the same. He was close enough for me to see the silver threads at his temples, the texture of his starched white shirt. He was no longer the devastated, grieving man from the courtroom. He was something more focused, harder. He placed his black leather-bound Bible against the glass, a shield of righteousness between us. His eyes weren't empty this time. They were ablaze with an icy zeal, the fervor of a man convinced of his divine mission. He didn't come as a grieving man. He came as an inquisitor. "Sarah Jane." His voice was soft, almost silky, but it cut through the stagnant air of the living room. It wasn't the voice he used in the pulpit, full of thunder and promise. It was an intimate, controlled voice, the voice he probably used at home, moments before the silence became unbearable. "I have been praying for you." The statement hit me like a slap. Prayed for me? The hypocrisy was so thick it almost choked me. I remained silent, my grip on the phone so tight my fingers ached. "I came here today," he continued, his eyes fixed on mine, "not out of hatred, but out of concern for your soul. The court gave you man's justice, but God's justice is still pending." He gestured to the Bible against the glass. "Confession is the first step toward grace. You are in a place of darkness, but even here, the light can enter. You just need to open the door. Admit what you did, Sarah Jane. Admit your sin." He was asking me to lie, to solidify his charade in exchange for some twisted spiritual redemption. He wanted me to become the liar he created, so his conscience could be clear. He needed the story to end with my admission, not with the jury's verdict. He needed me to validate his vengeance as divine justice. The image of Eliza, pale and cold on the office floor, flashed through my mind. The smell of bleach, the fake diary, the anger, an emotion I had suppressed for months under layers of shock and fear, suddenly surged like liquid fire. It burned through the fog. For the first time, I didn't see him as a pastor, as a man of God, or even as a widower. I saw him as a weak, terrified man. The mini-turn was internal, silent, but it changed everything. My trembling stopped. My hand gripped the phone. I leaned close to the glass, so close that my breath blurred my vision of him momentarily. When I spoke, my voice wasn't a whisper. It was short, cold, and full of the only power I had left, the truth. I didn't kill Eliza, I said, each word distinct and clear. I didn't ask for her forgiveness because I don't need it. I didn't commit the sin. You did. His reaction was almost imperceptible, but to me, it was seismic. The pious smile faltered. His eyes widened slightly, not in anger, but in sheer shock. He hadn't expected resistance. He expected a broken woman begging for absolution. He expected tears. Instead, he found a mirror. Silence stretched. He recomposed his mask of righteousness, but the damage was done. He slammed the phone down abruptly, the sound crackling in my ear. He stood, picked up his Bible, and left the room without looking back. I watched his rigid back disappear. The guards came to get me. As they led me back down the gray corridor, I no longer felt like a victim being dragged away. I had been convicted of a crime I didn't commit, but I had just fought my first real battle, and I hadn't lost. I didn't know it, but he would return, and the war for my soul was only beginning. He returned. The following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. Tuesday became my day of personal crucifixion. The ritual was always the same. The guard shouting my name in the laundry room, the impatient snorts of the other women, the silent walk down the gray hallway, and the visiting cubicle that now smelled of his weak cologne and the leather of his Bible. The initial visit, where I encountered my anger, was an explosion. What followed was slow, methodical psychological torture. He changed tactics. He no longer asked me to confess. Instead, he complained. He sat on the other side of the glass, his eyes filled with a performative sadness, and read the scriptures to me. He read about Judas and the betrayal, about Mary Magdalene and the forgiveness of sins, about the corrosive nature of unconfessed guilt. He transformed the Word of God into a verbal lash, each verse a veiled accusation, each pause a silent judgment. "I pray for you, Sarah Jane," he would say, his soft voice dripping with false compassion. "I pray that the truth will free your soul, even if your body must remain here. Eliza would have forgiven you. She was full of grace, but she cannot forgive you until you admit what you did." He spoke of her, our Eliza, as if she were a saint I had desecrated. He used her memory, the memory of the woman who trusted me, as his sharpest weapon. I stopped responding. I had learned that my silence frustrated him more than my denial. I sat there motionless, focusing on a scratch on the acrylic, turning his voice into a distant hum. But the poison seeped in. The guards watched me with a mixture of contempt and reluctant admiration for the holy pastor. "Your one-man fan club is here, Thompson," one of them sneered. "Must be nice to have God on your side, huh?" The irony was caustic. His public devotion to my soul was solidifying my guilt in the eyes of everyone in prison. I was the hardened sinner who made a man of God suffer. This reputation made my life within the walls exponentially more difficult. The other inmates saw me as a lost cause, or worse, as someone receiving special attention. Mama J, the uncrowned queen of the wing, cornered me in the showers, the hot steam enveloping us like a mist. "You think you're special?" she hissed, her eyes small and hard. "You think this preacher coming here every week buys you protection? Here, God can't hear you." "Only I can." I cowered, but there was nowhere to retreat. My invisibility had become notoriety. And then, something unexpected happened. That night, as I sat on my bunk, my body trembling with the pent-up adrenaline of the confrontation. My cellmate, Anna, spoke for the first time in months. She was a shadow, serving time for fraud, a woman who seemed to have voluntarily faded away. She didn't even turn around. "You're dealing with him wrong," she said, her voice a harsh whisper. I froze. "He doesn't come for God," she continued, finally turning around. Her eyes were dark and intelligent. "He comes for himself. Men like that, they don't want justice. They want power. You gave him your silence. Good. Now give him pity." I was confused. "Pity?" I asked. "Yes," said Anna. "Stop being the monster he wants you to be. Be his victim. Cry. Ask him why. Make him justify not his sin, but his share." The turning point was the realization that Anna wasn't just a cellmate. She was a strategist. She gave me a new weapon. The pastor's torment was about to turn against him. The following Tuesday arrived with a different feeling. The usual fear that had been building up in my stomach was no longer a paralyzing dread. It was an electric, sharp energy. It was the fear of an actor before going on stage. Anna's words echoed in my mind. Make him justify it. Share. The guard shouted my name. On the walk to the visiting room, I wasn't preparing to endure the pain. I was rehearsing my performance. But the irony was that it wouldn't be entirely a performance. The pain was real. The injustice was real. The tears were always there, waiting just below the surface. I didn't need to fabricate emotion. I just needed to use it. I sat on the cold stool, the scent of his cologne and the leather of the Bible already seeming to permeate the acrylic. He entered with the same rigid composure, the same aura of tarnished sanctity. He sat down, picked up the headset, and opened his Bible to a red ribbon bookmark. The weapon was ready. He cleared his throat, his eyes fixing on me with that look of a pious surgeon, ready to cut. "Sarah Jane," he began, his voice falling into that soft, mournful tone I'd come to despise. I was meditating on the story of Achan in Joshua chapter 7. A man who took what was cursed and, through his greed, brought disaster upon his entire household. I didn't let him continue. This was the moment. I lifted my gaze from my lap and met his directly. I didn't inject anger or defiance. I let it fall. I let all the exhaustion, all the fear, all the loneliness of a year in that gray hell flood my face. I let my shoulders slump. I allowed myself to tremble, a genuine trembling of pure misery. And then I let the tears come. They weren't forced, they were released. They streamed hot down my face, and I raised a trembling hand against the cold glass. My voice came out choked, a broken whisper. "Pastor, please." He stopped, his mouth slightly open. Confusion flickered in his eyes. He was prepared for denial, for stoic silence, for righteous anger. He wasn't prepared for this. He leaned closer, like a predator smelling blood, thinking this was the breakdown he'd been waiting for. "Yes, Sarah Jane?" he asked, his voice now anxious. "Is it God's word? Has it finally broken your pride?" I shook my head, a sob shaking my body. "It's not God's word," I whispered into the phone. "It's you." I watched him absorb that. "I don't understand. Please help me understand." He frowned, his certainty wavering. "Understand what, child? The nature of sin?" "No," I said, tears now flowing freely. "I understand what the jury said. I understand I'm here for the rest of my life. What I don't understand is why you keep coming." I hit him with the exact question Anna gave me. "Why are you doing this to me? You won. They locked me up. What more do you want from me? Why do you hate me so much?" The mini turn was glorious and terrible. His face, the face of the righteous and grieving man, contorted, but not with compassion. It was with a defensive fury. I was no longer playing the monster. I was playing the victim. And that made him what? The executioner. I had stripped him of his pious armor. "I don't hate her, Sarah Jane," he hissed, his voice losing its gentleness and gaining a sharp, angry tone. "I hate sin. I hate what you did to her." "But you knew me," I cried, now using the very truth as a weapon. "You saw how I cared for her when you were busy with the church. He knows I would never hurt her. So why are you doing this?" The word "no" hung in the air between us. It was an accusation. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping noisily on the linoleum floor. He slammed the phone down so hard the sound crackled in my ear. He didn't look at me. He looked at the guard across the room, his face red. He was panting, no longer the serene pastor, but a man unmasked. Without a word to me, he turned and left. I watched him go, my body still trembling. But the taste in my mouth wasn't salt, it was power. I had broken him. I had made him run. And I knew with cold certainty that the game had changed. The following Tuesday arrived with the same metallic taste of dread. I waited for my name to be called in the laundry room, my body tensing with each shout of "Thompson" or "visitor" from the hallway. But the day passed. Hot steam rose, the lunch bell rang, the afternoon sun created dusty bars on the dirty floor, and my name was never called. The following week was the same. Pastor Thomas's silence was a glaring presence, an unanswered question hanging in the stale prison air. The relief I felt was overwhelming, like taking a deep breath after nearly drowning. But it was also unsettling. Regular torture had at least a routine. This new silence felt like the still air before a tornado. His absence was as loud as his Bible verses had been, a void that seemed to be filling with something new and unknown. My relationship with Anna changed. The single whisper that night opened a door between us. We were no longer just cellies, two strangers forced to share a concrete coffin. We began to talk, in hushed voices after the lights went out. Anna wasn't your average criminal. She spoke with a precision and insight that surprised me. I discovered she had been a financial analyst, imprisoned for a complex fraud that she still described with a certain intellectual pride. She understood systems. She understood manipulators. She didn't see prison as punishment, but as a complex social puzzle. She became my mentor. She taught me to read the invisible currents of power in the cafeteria, to identify which guard was lazy and which was sadistic, to use the cafeteria soap not just for washing, but to trade for extra stamps. She was teaching me how to survive. "His not coming back isn't a victory," she told me one night, her voice barely audible above the snoring of the woman in the next cell. "It's a tactical pause. You scared him. You did what no one ever did. You called him something other than pastor. You called him you." She was right. I had broken the spell. "Men like him," she continued, "men who build their lives on a foundation of public righteousness, they can't stand a mirror. And you, Sarah Jane, you became his mirror. He hated the reflection." The thought sent a shiver down my spine. "So, what will he do now?" I asked. Anna was silent for a long moment. The only sound was the distant creak of a metal gate. "He can't try to break you personally anymore, because you broke him first. So, he'll try to break you in another way. He'll attack what you have." I looked around our dark cell. "I have nothing," I said. The little turnaround was her answer. Anna turned in her bunk to face me in the darkness, her eyes catching the dim light from the hallway. "You have me," she whispered. "We're a prison family now, even if there are only two of us. In his mind, I'm the one who's hardening you. I'm the one who gave you the gun. He's not going to attack your soul anymore. He's going to attack your sanity, and he's going to try to use me to do it." In that moment, I realized that the victory in the visiting room hadn't freed me. It had only escalated the war. I wasn't alone anymore, but that meant that, for the first time since I was imprisoned, I had something to lose. The next battle wouldn't be fought through acrylic glass. It would be fought in here, in these gray hallways, and my only ally had just marked herself as the next target. 2 weeks passed in tense silence. Pastor Thomas did not return. Prison life continued its monotonous rhythm, but the bond between Anna and me became my anchor. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was learning. She taught me how to dehydrate fruit from the cafeteria to save, how to use threads from socks to mend clothes, how to read the guards' moods by the way their keys jingled. I began to feel something dangerous, a fragile sense of stability. We shared our fears in the darkest hours, and the weight of my life sentence seemed, for a few moments, bearable. She was my only connection to sanity, the only person who saw Sarah Jane instead of the pastor's killer. And as Anna had predicted, that was exactly what he attacked. It happened without warning, not during the day, but in the middle of the night count, a time when routines were never broken. 3 guards, including the ward chief sergeant, a man I rarely saw, stopped at our cell. The sound of the key turning manually in the lock, instead of the usual electric hum, made my blood run cold. "Against the wall, you two!" he barked. Panic was instant. Cell searches were common, but never like this. Never at night, never with the sergeant. They weren't searching casually, they were on a mission. They tore the cell apart. They overturned our bunks, throwing the thin mattresses on the floor, ripping up Anna's few books, smashing the family photos she had taped to the wall with toothpaste. "What are you looking for?" Anna asked, her voice cold, but I could feel her body tense beside me. The sergeant didn't answer. He went straight to Anna's bunk bed, grabbed his plastic knife from the cafeteria, and began to pry open the metal stitching on the bed frame. And then he stopped. He reached in and pulled something out. A small cell phone and a small plastic bag containing white pills. My heart sank. Anna didn't react. She didn't gasp, didn't cry, didn't deny it. She just closed her eyes for a brief second, a terrible, silent acceptance. Contraband, trafficking, and a cell phone. "You're in deep trouble, Ruiz," the sergeant growled, triumph in his voice. It was all so quick, so efficient, so clean. The drugs in the phone weren't hidden. They were planted. Anna knew, and I knew. "Handcuffs on her," he ordered. As they pulled her away, she glanced at me over her shoulder. There was no fear in her eyes. There was only a deep sadness and a grim confirmation. "I told you," she whispered, so low I could barely hear. "They always come after what you love." The turning point was the cell door slamming shut, leaving me alone amidst the destruction. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. It was the sound of Pastor Thomas's victory. Anna was right. He didn't need to visit me anymore. He didn't need to use the scriptures anymore. He had a reach that went beyond the acrylic, beyond the steel gates. He was a man of God on the outside, a respected community leader, and with a phone call, he could plant drugs, move prisoners, destroy the only friendship I had. I was no longer fighting a man. I was fighting his influence, which seemed as omnipresent as the God he pretended to serve. He had isolated me on purpose. He didn't just want me to confess. He wanted to destroy me, piece by piece. And now, I was truly alone. The hole isn't a cell. It's a concrete tomb where they bury you alive. Isolation, or punitive segregation, as they officially called it, was Anna's fate, but also mine. Since the contraband was found in the cell we shared, I was considered an accomplice. 30 days. The world shrank into a space so small I could touch both walls by stretching my arms. 23 hours a day of deafening silence, broken only by the electric hum of the fluorescent light that never went out. The constant light was a form of torture in itself, designed to erase the difference between night and day, to dissolve your mind into time. The only human interaction was the metallic sound of the crack in the steel door opening 3 times a day, when a tray was pushed inside by invisible hands. The air was still and smelled of mold, despair, and the faint odor of my own excrement in the steel toilet. In the first few days, I paced in circles, slapping my palms against the cold concrete until they were red. I screamed for Anna, shouted Pastor Thomas's name at the unresponsive walls. I wept until my eyes burned in the incessant light. But after a week, the panic gave way to something far more terrifying: nothingness. My brain began to shut down. I sat on the cold floor, staring at a stain on the wall for hours, trying to remember my mother's face, the smell of freshly cut grass, the texture of Eliza's silk robe. The memories began to fade, to flatten. This was the goal. Isolation didn't break your bones. It dissolved your soul. I no longer had Anna to anchor me. I no longer had my anger. I only had the stain on the wall and the endless buzzing. I was at the bottom of the pit that Pastor Thomas had dug for me. So, on what I think was the 15th day, a different sound broke the monotony. Not the clank from the crack in the food, but the heavy creaking of the main bolt. The door swung open, and the hallway light seemed as blinding as the sun. A guard growled, "Stand up. Visitor." I was confused. Visitor? Here? In the hole? They handcuffed me, my wrists against the chain at my waist, and led me to a special visiting room, a wire mesh cage inside an empty room. And there he was, Pastor Thomas. He had obtained special permission. He had come to inspect his work. He wanted to see what was left of me after his influence had sent me to hell. He sat on the other side of the mesh, his presence seeming to suck the little air that was there. He looked solemn, his face a mask of pious concern. He had seen what they did to Anna. He knew I was alone. This was his final blow. Sarah Jane. His voice was low, almost gentle, the voice of a disappointed father. I heard about your trouble. Sin always leads to more darkness. The company you kept, the violence, look what it brought you. He was blaming me for Anna's fate. He expected me to howl, to pound the mesh, to beg. He expected the final, desperate confession of a broken soul. I lifted my head. The light from the hallway behind him created a halo, making him a dark silhouette of justice. I was thin. I was dirty. I hadn't slept in days. But the hole had burned away everything superfluous. The fear was gone. The anger was gone. All that remained was the bare bone of truth. I looked at him, my eyes dry and clear. You took Anna from me, I whispered, my voice rough with disuse. You put me in this hole. There's nothing more you can take, and I'm still here, and I still haven't done it. The turning point was the look on his face. It wasn't anger, it wasn't triumph, it was confusion. For the first time, his unwavering certainty wavered. He looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time. He expected a broken animal, but found an exhausted human being who refused to lie. The armor of his righteousness cracked. He stood without a word, the confusion turning into something akin to dread. He left quickly. Doubt had crept in. Pastor Thomas did not return to the prison. That encounter in the steel cage room, in the heart of the isolation ward, had done what 2 years of stoic denial had failed to do. It had shattered his certainty. He had expected to find a monster, or at least the fractured remains of a guilty woman consumed by her sins. Instead, he found something far more disturbing. He found Sarah Jane, reduced to her rawest, most exhausted essence, and that essence was still innocent. Her exhaustion was pure, not guilty. Her refusal to confess was no longer pride. It seemed for the first time to be simple, stubborn truth. Her image, thin and dirty, but with clear, unwavering eyes, haunted his sermons. His own words about truth and light now seemed hollow, echoing back to him from the pulpit with an accusatory tone. He found himself late at night in his office, the same office where Eliza had died. The smell of bleach had long since faded, replaced by the smell of dust and old books, but suddenly the memory of the chemical smell hit him hard. Why was there so much bleach? The police had assumed Sarah Jane had used it in a panic to clean off her fingerprints, but she was the housekeeper. Her fingerprints would be all over the house anyway. It didn't make sense. He opened his drawer and pulled out the copy of Eliza's diary that the prosecution had used. The diary he himself had found and handed over. He read the words again. S.J. is becoming possessive. I feel scared. At the time, in his grief and anger, those words seemed like a shocking revelation. Now they seemed wrong. The handwriting was Eliza's, yes, but the tone? The woman he ignored but knew was melancholic and poetic, not frightened and direct. He went to her closet, something he hadn't done since the funeral. He ran his fingers over the silk clothes hanging there, the faint scent of her perfume still lingering. He knelt on the floor, feeling the floorboards, just as the detective had done when he found the fake diary. But now he was looking for something else. He pressed a board near the back wall, one that seemed slightly misaligned. It moved. Beneath it was an empty space. The real diary, the blue leather one that Sarah Jane had once mentioned in a frantic whisper in court, a whisper he dismissed as the lie of a desperate woman, had been there, and now it was gone. The mini-turn was the cold, sickening realization that washed over him. He hadn't found his wife's diary. The diary had been left for him to find. The smell of bleach, the fake diary, the murder weapon left so conveniently. It wasn't a panicked cleanup. It was a setup. And if he, the grieving widower, had been so easily deceived, he realized with horror that he had used all his power and influence, not to avenge his wife, but to condemn the only other witness to the crime. He hadn't sought justice. He had completed the murder. After 30 days, the world returned. The steel door of the solitary confinement cell swung open, and the light from the corridor felt like a physical assault. "Stand up, Thompson. Your time is up." My limbs were stiff, my skin pale and clammy. I blinked against the light, my eyes aching. The guard led me back to the general ward, and the noise of the prison population, the shouts, the laughter, the constant echo of voices and clanging metal, hit me like a solid wall. I felt like a diver ascending too fast. I was assigned a new cell at the other end of the ward. My new cellmate was an older, quiet woman who merely gave me a nod before returning to her book. The cell was empty. Anna's few belongings, the photos, the books, all gone. The space where she slept was now just an empty mattress, waiting for the next body. The solitude was absolute. I had won the battle in the chain-link cage, but I returned to find my former life decimated. I returned to my routine in the laundry room. The hot steam on my face felt strange, a sensory luxury after the dead air of solitary confinement. The other inmates gave me more space now. The rumor had spread. I'd gone to the hole and back. Mama J no longer looked at me in the showers. My confrontation with the shepherd and his subsequent disappearance, followed by my punishment and survival, had given me a new status. It wasn't respect, it was fear, or perhaps the understanding that I was a different kind of ghost, one they couldn't touch. But this new strength felt empty. I missed Anna's rough voice in the dark. I missed the strategy, the camaraderie. The shepherd had turned me into an island, surrounded by hostile waters, and I wasn't sure how long I could survive before sinking. I was free from the hole, but more trapped than ever. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Pastor Thomas was in his own kind of isolation. The empty space under the floorboard haunted him. He began to see his house not as a sanctuary, but as a crime scene he had helped to cover up. He stared at the marble bookend the police had returned, now clean and back on his desk. He picked it up, feeling its cold weight in his hand. He imagined the impact. He remembered Eliza's anger, not at me, but at him. He remembered the silent arguments, the slammed doors, the way she flinched when he raised his voice in righteous indignation. He remembered someone else. A man. A church organist he had abruptly fired 6 months before the murder. A man with whom Eliza seemed to have had too close a friendship. A man with a volatile temper and a history of jealousy. A man he, in his wounded pride, had threatened to expose. The term mini turnaround was a lightning bolt that popped into his mind. Jonathan, the organist. He had disappeared shortly after the murder. At the time, the pastor assumed he had fled because of the scandal. Now, a much darker possibility has taken shape. What if the fake diary hadn't been planted for him? What if it had been planted for the police? Why, then, did Jonathan frame the only other person in the house? And he, the pastor, in his arrogance and blind need for a culprit, had swallowed the whole bait. He had taken Jonathan's lie and turned it into gospel. He had not only condemned an innocent woman, he had been a pawn in the real murderer's game. The realization brought no relief, only a deep, holy nausea. He was not a widower seeking justice. He was a proud fool and an accomplice to murder. The truth was not freeing him. It was threatening to destroy him. The sound of my name being shouted in the laundry yard, this time by a guard I barely knew, didn't cause the usual tension. "Thompson, director's office, bring your things." The yard fell silent. Bring your things meant only two things: transfer to a maximum security facility or freedom. There was no middle ground. The women stopped folding sheets, their eyes following me with a mixture of fear and envy. I returned to my cell in a trance, grabbed my toothbrush and the only book Anna had left me, and followed the guard. We didn't walk toward the visiting rooms. We walked toward administration, a part of the building that smelled of floor wax, fresh coffee, and paper. These were the smells of the real world. These were the smells of bureaucracy, of the power that decided your fate on a form. I felt my stomach churn. They made me sit in a plastic chair in front of the director's desk. The director, a man I had only seen from afar, seemed uncomfortable. There was another man in the room, wearing an expensive suit, who introduced himself as a lawyer for Project Innocence. The words that followed didn't seem to connect. New evidence, full confession from Mr. Jonathan Davies, corroboration by, and then the words that stopped my heart, and a formal confession of perjury from Pastor Thomas. The pastor. He had done it. He had actually confessed to your lies. The lawyer looked at me with kind, professional eyes. "Your conviction has been overturned, Sarah Jane. The court has issued an order for immediate release. You are free to go." I looked at my hands, still stained with bleach from the laundry. Free? The word had no taste, no color. It was just a sound. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel relieved. I felt hollow. The system that had swallowed me whole was now spitting me back out with the same impersonal efficiency. The exit process was the entry process in reverse. They gave me the clothes I wore on the day of my sentencing, the borrowed suit. It hung on me, my body thinner and stiffer from years of tasteless food and constant tension. It smelled of mothballs, the smell of a life suspended. A guard led me through a series of gates. The sound of the latches opening in front of me, instead of closing behind me, was disorienting. Clank, shh, clank, shh. And then, the final gate slid open. The afternoon sunlight hit me with physical force. It was so bright, so warm. I stepped out from the concrete of the prison onto the asphalt of the parking lot, and I froze. He was there, not the pastor, not the man of God, just Thomas. He was leaning against a simple car, looking 10 years older. His hair was grayer, his face etched with lines of guilt gnawing at him. He wasn't wearing his power suit. He was wearing simple trousers and a crumpled shirt. He looked broken. He saw me and took a hesitant step toward me. "Sarah Jane." His voice was a hoarse whisper. I stopped, the hot sun on my face, the sound of the gates closing behind me for the last time. I thought that if I saw him free, I would scream. I would attack him. I would demand my years back. But looking at him, all the fire had gone out. He was just a pathetic man, an empty shell of a man, destroyed by his own arrogance. He began to cry, real ugly tears, the tears of a broken man. I sinned, he choked. "I sinned against you, against God, against Eliza. I don't know." He was searching for something. The mini-turn hit me with blinding clarity. He wasn't here to free me. He was here to be freed. He had visited me for years, demanding a confession to ease his own soul. Now he was here, at the gate of my prison, demanding absolution. He needed that, I asked him to forgive me so that he could move on. My sentence was over. His was just beginning. I looked at him, the architect of all my suffering, and felt the final, most unexpected emotion of all. Pity. "May God have mercy on your soul, Pastor," I said, my voice clear in the afternoon air. And without waiting for a reply, I turned and began to walk down the long road, leaving him there, alone with his guilt, outside the gates. Perfect. This is the final block, the epilogue to Sarah Jane's journey. Here is the topic 15, the conclusion of the story. Script, The Shepherd, Block 15 of 15. The outside world was noisy. It was the first thing I noticed after the glare of the sun. The cars, the voices of people talking on cell phones, the music coming from a store. It was a cacophony that felt like it was scratching my skin. For years, my world had been defined by echoes, whispers, and the roar of metal. This newfound freedom felt like an assault. I took a bus to nowhere, just to feel the movement, to watch the scenery go by through a window I could open. The money that Project Innocence gave me felt like toy paper in my hands. I ended up in a small coastal town hundreds of miles away, a place where the only constant sound was that of the ocean. Ash, the rhythm I remembered breathing. I rented a small room above a flower shop. The scent of damp earth and lilies rose through the floorboards, and it was the cleanest smell I had ever experienced. It was the opposite of bleach and iron. My new life is made up of small things. I found a job at the flower shop itself, taking care of the plants, my hands now in the soil instead of on industrial sheets. But prison doesn't leave you. Not really. I wake up every day at 5 in the morning without an alarm clock, my body still tuned to the bell that no longer exists. I eat quickly, standing in the kitchen, as if someone were going to steal my food. And I can't sleep with my bedroom door closed. The feeling of being locked in makes me wake up in a panic, my heart pounding. Freedom, I've discovered, isn't an event. It's a process. It's learning to trust the silence again. It's learning that an open door isn't a trap, but an invitation. It's relearning to be Sarah Jane and not the prisoner number that was engraved in my mind. I never heard from Anna again. I tried to find her, but the system is a black hole. She was transferred and her name disappeared from the records. I hope she's using her wits to survive wherever she is. As for Pastor Thomas, I read about him online. His confession of perjury and the scandal of his wrongful conviction destroyed his career. He lost his church, his home, the respect of the community. He became the pariah he had made me into. He now lives in his own kind of isolation, a prison of guilt from which there is no parole. Justice, in the end, proved to be a double-edged sword, cutting the guilty and the accomplice alike. His need for my confession was, in the end, his own need. He only needed to destroy my life to realize that. People say I'm a miracle, a symbol of hope. They don't understand. The miracle wasn't my liberation. The system that imprisoned me is the same one that freed me. A capricious machine that doesn't care about the truth, only about procedures. The miracle was what happened in the dark cell of solitary confinement. The realization that even when it took everything, my freedom, my reputation, my only friend, it couldn't take away the truth. Sometimes, God doesn't open the cell. He sits with you in the darkness. My story isn't about justice. Justice is human, flawed, and often blind to what matters most. My story is about truth. Truth doesn't liberate you. It makes you unbreakable. It becomes the inner cell that protects you, the only wall that no guard, no pastor, and no liar can tear down. Sometimes, God doesn't open the cell. He changes who we are inside. Sarah Jane's story has ended, but her journey reflects so many others. She was imprisoned by concrete walls, but the pastor was imprisoned by his own pride and vengeance. Both were in prison. If you've ever felt trapped by something you didn't do, if you've ever been defined by someone else's judgment, or if you've ever felt the weight of silence when you needed to shout the truth, this story is yours too. If you believe these voices deserve to be heard and want to support this space for reflection, please sign up, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications. Press the button, enjoy. If Sarah Jane's journey touched you, this helps us reach more people who need to hear a story of hope and truth. And please, comment below. What did you feel the moment she was freed? Do you think the pastor deserved the forgiveness he sought in the end? Or simply tell us which one, city or country you're watching. We love seeing how far these stories go. Thank you for honoring these voices with us.